So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Terry Gould to accept this award.
I'm deeply humbled to receive this honor in the company of others who have suffered so grievously for their work. Dmitry Muratov, editor of Novaya Gazeta, there are few people in Canada who can imagine what it is like to lose 4 colleagues to targeted assassinations. There are no words to express such loss to others, but the boundless courage of Novaya's journalists who continue with their work explains to us the ultimate meaning of that loss. The other awardee, Zhila Banyagub, has been beaten, arrested, and repeatedly imprisoned for her work. She's not here this evening because she bravely remains in Iran. Like Novaya Gazeta's journalists, she risks all for her work. I'm equally humbled because this honor is named in the memory of the murdered journalist Tara Singh Hare. 2 of the award's previous recipients, Guy Andre Kiefer and Zara Kazemi, were murdered for their work and were presented with the honor posthumously. The third, Michel Auger, barely survived being repeatedly shot for his work. These journalists pose a question that is both uplifting and terrifying. Trying to answer that question changed my life. The question is this: why do journalists persist in their reporting in the face of threats of certain death? In Tara Singh Hare's last decade, 1 bullet had put him in a wheelchair, and he knew the next would kill him. A week before he was murdered, he told journalist Kim Bolin, "You can't do much to stop someone from attacking you. There's no point in being afraid." Under a barrage of threats, he told his son Dave, "If they are going to kill me for what I publish, so be it. I will not stop." He did not stop, and as he expected, he was murdered. Hare's example of unstoppable courage is not uncommon in our profession. Around the world, hundreds of murdered journalists have foreseen what awaited them, yet, like Hare, they continued their reporting until the bloody end. The 7 murdered journalists I wrote about in my book were all very different people from 5 very different countries, but they'd all arrived at exactly the same mindset as Tara Singh Hare. They all concluded that in order to advance their work, they had to accept death as a consequence of that work. They achieved a psychology of sacrifice we usually associate with pure goodness. I found there were 2 components to the psychology of sacrifice in the lives of the murdered journalists I wrote about. The first was an overpowering event that made them believe passionately in the principle that the powerful had to be prevented from oppressing the weak at all costs. The second was that their communities were dominated by criminals who believed in the opposite principle, that the weak offered opportunities for the enrichment of the powerful. Political and religious predators who rule communities permit no investigation into their ultimate motives, and they react violently when journalists reveal that they serve themselves. In one form or another, all of the slain journalists I studied attempted to expose organized criminal structures that dominated the governance of nations where 20 or 60 or 100 journalists had already been murdered. As journalists under threat, they had three options. They could flee, they could agree to stay silent, or they could continue to expose the murderers and thieves who tormented their neighbors. They were methodical and rational people, and making that decision took time. The consequences were weighed. They struggled with themselves and finally pushed their fears aside. They each experienced a moment when they realized they were willing to die to get the story out. I think anyone can identify with a dangerous decision they made if one remembers that they were standing up for their homes.